perspective of Rav Kook, the Tfisah Tutit, the holistic view that takes everything into consideration, seeing the divine that's revealed in all that's existence. We mentioned how taking from the individual understanding, the private, to take it to the global, to the universal, to the bigger picture, and thus to see the source of all that's in behind all the events and reality. So tonight, as an example, maybe we saw a few examples before, but now it's very pertinent to the month of Elul about Teshuva, the concept of Teshuva. How Rav Kook will take this concept that we all know about, think about, and all of a sudden to show a more holistic picture of this very, again, what we think is a very simple concept. And the truth is, without this higher view, this more expanded view of Teshuva, it has very strong and severe ramifications, as we hopefully will talk about. Because usually when we think of Teshuva, you think of someone that wasn't religious. Someone grabbed him at the kotel and said, "You want to come learn in yeshiva? You want to start doing the mitzvot?" Secular Jew, long hair or whatever, taking drugs, and now he's they got him to put on tefillin and he changed his ways. Like I said, we'll see how Rav Kook takes this concept and gives a totally different view. That usually the books of Teshuva, there's a lot of books of Teshuva. The Rambam has the laws of Teshuva, Hilchot Teshuva, the Sharei Teshuva, Rabbi Yonah, Chovot al-Bavot, the duties of the heart has a section, right, the gate of Teshuva. But Orot Teshuva, which is one of the few books that Rav Kook actually wrote, again, the first 3 chapters. After that, his son collected from the writings, but he actually started to write a book on Teshuva, and he explains why, but that maybe we'll get to. But not only about how to do Teshuva and what to do, or to arouse you to do Teshuva, the moral, ethical obligation to do Teshuva, beyond that, including that, but beyond that, the inner essence, the significance, the meaning of Teshuva, the larger perspective of Teshuva that is not just the realm of the individual with his private sins, his specific sins that he has to fix and repent for, but a totally different perspective. So in order to understand the concept of Teshuva, first maybe we'll see in the Torah how this word, this root, shuv, shin vav bet, is the root for Teshuva, returning. How it is found and used in the Torah. Again, very simple at the beginning, just to see a few examples. In the beginning, in Breshit, you all know the story of Noach and the ark. And Yonah sends out the dove.
Yes.
And then in chapter 8, verse 9, it says when he sent it out, he sent out came back, it didn't find a place to rest. Vayishlach, it says Noach sent out, I'll read in English. Noach sent forth the dove from him to see if the waters were abated from the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her feet, of her foot. Vatashov elav elateva. She returned to the teva. The dove returned to the ark. Finding no place to rest its feet, she returned to the ark. So here, Vatashov, very simple. Returning to the ark. Returning to the place from which she left. Also, in when Yaakov, the dream of the ladder, in chapter 28, verse 21, that Yaakov makes the promise. He makes a vow, if God, you'll be with me and keep me in this way, and I shall return. In Hebrew, I will return in peace to my father's house. Oh, the condition, there's some explanations here, if that's the condition or the outcome. God, he says, God be with me, and hopefully let me return to my house, to return to the being with you. Where is that? In Eretz Yisrael. And then you will be unto me a God, right? Coming back to Eretz Yisrael is returning to the attachment to Hashem. But here it says, B'shavti b'shalom, I'll return back in peace to my father's home. So again, we're returning, simple, like in English, the simple meaning, return to the place from which you came. Also right in Yirmiyahu 31, V'shavu banim l'gvulam, the sons will return to their borders after being in exile. But there's another context in the book of Kings 2, chapter 5, the story of Naaman. Naaman was the chief of staff of the army of Aram. And he was a mighty warrior, but he was stricken with tzarat. He had leprosy. And they went out to raiding parties. Just read you quickly the background. And he brought back a captive out of the land of Israel, a little girl, and she attended the wife of Naaman. Right? They took captive women, and he took her back, this Jewish woman from Israel, to be the servant, the maidservant of his wife. And she said to her mistress, she saw that her master's husband, in other words, the Naaman, was a leper. Says, why should he be a leper? If my Lord would turn to the prophet that is in Shomron, he would heal him of his disease. Why don't you go to the prophet? The Jews, she was a little girl, very simple and naive. We have prophets that take care of these things. Why don't you send him, your husband, to the prophet in Shomron, in Eretz Yisrael? So they went and told Aram, thus says the girl that was out of the land of Israel. So they said, okay, I'll send a letter to the king of Israel. And he took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, now when this letter has come to you, behold, I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you. This is the king of Aram, right? The king sends this, all these money and whatever with Naaman and saying, now take care of Naaman. I heard you can take care of him, you can heal him. He sends this letter to the king of Israel. When the king of Israel heard this, he rent his clothes. What am I doing here? To kill and to make, he sends me to cure a man of his infection? I pray you. What, he's just seeking a quarrel against me? How does he expect me to save it? What am I, a miracle worker? The king of Israel doesn't know how to do such a thing. He thinks he's probably coming to, if you can't heal him, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to come and destroy, go to war with you. He says, what is he coming like an alibi, so to speak, just to come against him? And he says, Elisha, the prophet, heard that the king of Israel rent his clothes. And he said to the king, why have you rent your clothes? What's the problem? Is there anything going on in Israel today? He said, let me come. Let him come to me now, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. She'edah ki yesh navi, let him know. Let him come to the prophet, and let him see what Israel, or the power of Am Yisrael. So Naaman came with the horses and with his chariot, and they stood at the door of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, go and dip in the Jordan River 7 times. That's what the prophet told Naaman. You want to get rid of your leprosy? I have a great cure for you. Go dip in the Jordan 7 times. And your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean. What was Naaman's reaction? He was angry, very disappointed. Why? You go to a prophet, you expect him to tell you, take an abracadabra, an eye of newt, and bring me 50 hairs of a cat and put them together and jump off, whatever. It's something mystical, something spiritual, something that a prophet is supposed to say. Not, Judaism, religion, spirituality is something out of this world. What, to go in the Jordan? I'm reading now back in the Malachi, the book of Kings. Now Naaman was angry and went away and said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call in the name of God, to wave his hand over the place and so heal the infected person. I have other rivers, Amanah, Parpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel. I can wash in them and be clean. So he turned and went away in rage. Why, I need rivers? We have rivers in Syria. So his servant said to him, my father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So all the more so when all he says is to go dip in the Jordan for 7 times and you'll be clean. So, worth a try maybe, whatever. So, then when he went down, he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. But here the word, why am I getting to this whole story? Because the wording is, Vayashov b'saro kibsar nar katon. His flesh returned like the flesh of a child. In other words, here the word shov, to return, is not the place from which you came. You left a certain place. You left A, you go to point B, you return back to point A. Here it's returning in status, in the situation. The skin was nice and healthy, became leper, and now the skin is returning back to the situation that it was in before. So here, the word returning is in either, like I said, used in the Tanakh, either in returning from the place from which you came or returning to the situation from which you came. So accordingly, what's all this got to do with tshuva? According to this, tshuva, we could say, has certain hypothetical conclusions based on this. Again, I call them hypothetical because we'll see that hopefully Rav Kook will show a totally different understanding. But I just want to point out, just for those who don't get me wrong, these are now all possibilities of thinking of what logically makes sense accordingly, that if tshuva is to return from where you came, so there come out of certain conclusions. One, that tshuva is only after sin. If there's no sin, there's nothing to return to. There's nothing to go back to. A tzaddik, let's say, theoretically, a tzaddik, a righteous person, tzaddik gamor, he can advance. He can become holier, litkadem, litalot, to rise up to spiritual elevations, to get to higher heights, but he's not returning. He was never there. He's getting to higher places. It's only after sin. You did a sin, and you have to go back to what you were before the sin. Return from your sin. And if so, then it's only by man, only by human beings, only by those who have free will. If there's no free will, then it's coercion. There's no tshuva. There's no, it's no sin. You didn't do anything bad. It's your nature. It's you're forced. But someone who has free will to choose and he chose wrong, then he has to do tshuva. And only it belongs to the individual. Like you and your individual, your mistakes. You made a mistake, you have to do your tshuva to fix your mistakes. And also maybe the absurd that only a religious person can do tshuva. Because someone who was religious fell, stopped doing or didn't do the mitzvot, he has to return to doing the mitzvot. But someone who wasn't religious, he's not returning. He's becoming religious, he's performing the mitzvot, but he's not returning from where he came. He never did them before. He was born secular, never knew, doesn't understand. And now he's rising up, he's getting closer to God. All that is true, but that's not tshuva. He's not returning. Again, theoretically, if the meaning, the root is like to return, he was never there. He's not to return. It's only from to a place or the situation you are in, like we saw in the above quotes from the Tanakh. So how is someone secular? He's not returning. How can he become about tshuva? Again, theoretically or paradoxically, someone who was religious that fell, and now he's returning. But a secular Jew can't. And also, it would seem that tshuva is only, let's say, a circumstantial, a chance event, a momentary phenomenon of an outcome of your negative use of free will. That if you, perchance, if you choose the wrong thing and do a sin, then you have to do tshuva. In other words, it's not an essential part of life. It's not a part of the day-to-day life. It's not a part of the mainstream. It's not a part of the road of life. The road is to stay on the road. If you fall off the road temporarily, then you should go back to the road and do tshuva and return. But life itself is without tshuva. In other words, tshuva is something that is not part of life, not an essential aspect. It's something that is there that if, God forbid, you should need it, if you fall off the road, to go back. But the normal road of life is you never meet tshuva. Maybe even more so if we look at the different categories of the mitzvot. The rabbis point out there's different definitions, but you could say there's three categories or of the commandments. One is what we call the obligatory commandments, mitzvah chiyuvit. There's an obligation for men to put on tefillin. There's an obligation to eat a kazayit of matzah on the night of Pesach, to eat a kazayit in the first night in the sukkah. That's an obligation. That's an obligatory commandment you have to do. There are also mitzvot that are called reshut, our permission. If the situation comes about, you can do this mitzvah. If you build a house, we read, I think, the Parshiot, right, now that we're reading in Dvarim. If you build a house and you want to go on the roof, you have to build a parapet. You have to build a ma'akeh. You have to build this fence on the roof, a parapet, whatever, ma'akeh. There's no obligation to build a house or to go on the roof. But if you do so, then there's a commandment to build that thing. If you want to eat meat, then you have to slaughter it properly. There's no obligation to go out and slaughter this animal. If you want to eat the meat, then it has to be slaughtered kosher. There's the way of doing it. So, in other words, it's what's called a mitzvah of reshut. We also read last week, right, the shiluach haken. If you see the mother, the bird sitting on the eggs, then you have to send away the mother, etc. But that's if it comes about. They say it's a big mitzvah, and if you do so, but it's not an obligation to go searching and finding and doing it every day. That's what's called a mitzvah mizdamenet, a mitzvah that comes about to you, like also the mitzvah of tzitzit. If you put on a four-cornered garment, you have to have the tzitzit. When the men wear this, you don't have to. In other words, the truth is, the rabbis talk about it severely if someone doesn't do so, but it's still not in the level of, it's hard to define. It is an obligation, so to speak. It's very worthy. But theoretically, it's if you only have that four-cornered garment, then upon that you have to have the fringes, the tzitzit. But there's a third type of mitzvah, like we also read about last week, of like, it says, v'yishivat hagzela, that you have to return the stolen article that you stole. If someone steals something, there's a positive commandment to return it. There's no mitzvah to fulfill that mitzvah. In other words, you don't have to steal in order to return. Not even, the tourists are not even allowed to. You can't steal something temporarily. No, he's not looking. I'll just take it for a little short time and then I'll return it to him. You're not allowed to steal. But if one steals, there's a positive commandment you fulfill by returning. To return the stolen article. But this is the mitzvah that we hope you never have to do. Don't steal and don't have to return it. Also the laws of divorce. We read last week in the Parsha that on Shabbat, that the writing the get kritut, the writing the writ of divorce, whatever, there's a commandment of how to write it. There's the fulfilling the commandment when you do so. But this is not a commandment that you are obligated to do or even should come upon to do. This is one of the commandments we call b'di'evet, that you shouldn't ever want to do. In other words, hopefully you'll never meet this mitzvah. But unfortunately, if someone doesn't find favor in his wife, whatever, they don't get along, then they get a divorce, and then there's a commandment of how to write the get, to do that divorce. So if so, according to all that we've said above, the commandment of Teshuva seemingly would fit into the third category. Don't sin, and you won't have to do Teshuva. In other words, it's just not a commandment, like I said, it's not part of your day-to-day life. It's something you should never have to do. But if, God forbid, you fall off the road, then do Teshuva, go back to the road. But it's not the mainstream of the road. It's not the thing that you should be doing and looking forward to, or thing that you should want to try to mizdamein. You should try to look for this mitzvah. No, stay away from the mitzvah. Teshuva is something you should never have to do. But unfortunately, we're all human. But say that we have to. But it's something that is, again, the b'di'evet, this after the fact, the negative commandment, not a negative commandment. It's something that you should hopefully never have to do. These are all what I call theoretical conclusions, because now I want to share with you the writings of Rav Kook and to show you how these, again, what I call hypothetical conclusions or understandings don't fit in to what Rav Kook writes. So here, I will share with you, I hope. Can you see? You can give a hands up. These are a few quotations from Orot Teshuva. They're not even full paragraphs. They are just sometimes one or two lines, as you see, from full paragraphs. Each one requires proper study and understanding. I just wanted to look at them now to measure against all the above conclusions or theoretical, hypothetical conclusions we came to, that tshuva is only for after sin, only for man, only a hyper, it's a circumstantial, if you happen to need it once upon a time, but it's something that we should try to never have to need or never to arrive at. We'll see now, just from these few lines of Rav Kook scattered in the different in this book of Rot Teshuva, to see how something goes wrong here. In other words, it doesn't go according to the conclusions that we arrived at to Teshuva, and then we'll have to come to a bigger understanding of Teshuva, which Rav Kook leads us into understanding something much greater. And like I said, this understanding is very important and has ramifications to our whole relation to the world, to other people, to life. And again, is representative of what we said. Rav Kook takes us into this bigger perspective in everything, in all the different topics. We mentioned a few about seeing the inner dimension, seeing what God is doing within, behind the scenes, not just looking at the moment, not just looking at the slice, the moment, the particular, the individual, but how to see this holistic, divine view of all. The view from the roots above, we called it, or Rav Yehuda used to call it. So here in the first section, there's 8 paragraphs here, 8 citations. The first one in Aleph on the upper right corner is from chapter 4, Dalid, paragraph Yud Aleph, 11. Omnam b'mamakei hachayim mitnotzetz b'chol rega or chadash shel tshuva l'yonah. That indeed in the depths of life shines, beams, every moment, this illumination of a new light of tshuva, of lofty tshuva. Here we see a few things. He says it's in the depths of life, which is not only individual and not after sin. Here it says every moment. It's not a one-time thing that if you should sit here, all of a sudden it's something that is a constant illumination from above, whatever, this light of tshuva, this new light constantly changing. But it's something, how do you say, it's a constant illumination, it's constant experience, not a one-time thing. We said that the less you meet tshuva, the better. Here, all of a sudden, it's a b'chol rega, every moment. Also, the next paragraph, which is in chapter 6. HaTshuva tamid shruya b'lev. Tshuva is constantly hovering, dwelling in the heart. It's this constant phenomenon in the heart of man, where it's underlined again, 2 lines down. Here he says even more than man. In the depths of existence, in the depth of existence of all of reality, tshuva dwells. That there's something that transcends man. It's not the individual man and not just the religious man. Tshuva is something that is in all of existence, in the depth, the inner workings, part, essential aspect, an element of all of existence. Later he goes on and underline, there's nothing as certain in the world as tshuva. Everything will ultimately be fixed. Everything will return. The next paragraph, right, this third paragraph, thirdly from chapter 5, paragraph 3. He says the world has to return to full tshuva, where it's underlined. Ein ha'olam davar omed al matzav echad. The world is not something that stays in one position, in one status. The world is constantly developing. The world is not static. Ki im holechu mitpateach. The world is rather is going, I mentioned to you always, Rav Kook, the holech, the going and developing, going and growing, this constant process unfolding. That's this view of seeing the reality from the view above, of not just look at the moment, the slice, but that's a process of development. The whole world is a process of development, a dynamic historical process of development from the past, present, to a more perfect and complete future. That's the summary of reality. It's not something that stands in place, al matzav echad, v'hitpatchut amitit hashlema, and this true and full development of the world, evolution of the world, muchrachati lavila et habriyut hagmora hachomrit v'ruchonit. This ultimately will bring the world to its total health, its total normalcy, both physical and spiritual. In other words, the world is in a process of development from less perfect towards perfection. we see in many places the development of the world, in technology and the scientific development, but also in the moral development and the social demand for social justice. It used to be that slavery, and now the world is more developed towards demanding the freedom for each individual, freedom of thoughts and ideas and speech. This actually goes against I think the second law of thermodynamics, of entropy, how the world is going towards the more simple, right? The example they give, it drops into the water, it separates, and then it scatters. It goes from the more complex to the simple. But here we're saying, no, the world is going towards more developed, more sophisticated, more perfected in every way, spiritual, physical, towards the ultimate perfection of the world, to the fulfillment of the divine ideal. The world used to be full of idolatry. Man used to look at the different forces of nature. You have the sun, you have the moon, you have the moon god. There's a god, there's a force above that guides everything. You have to serve the moon god, the sun god. There's the god of good, a god of evil, all the multiple forces. Now the world is turning more and more to the understanding of the oneness. We mentioned in science even the grand unification theory, or now they have TOE, the theory of everything. Now Einstein tried to find the one explanation, right? We have it down to four basic forces, right? The what do they call it? The weak forces, the nuclear, the magnetic forces, whatever. I don't know, Donna will say. But the different four forces in the gravity, the gravitational forces, Einstein said, no, we have to look for the one. In other words, this search for the one. Who says there's one? In other words, four is not bad. You got it down from the world of multiplicity down to four forces that guide all of the physical world. That's not bad. But no, this neshama of Am Yisrael, this Einstein, the need for, there's a one. There's have to be the one behind it all. Again, that's in the physical world. But the world is reaching more and more of that understanding of oneness, of unity, of harmony, which will ultimately lead to the understanding of the one of the whole world is one. The whole world is all multiple expressions of that one white light of God's goodness, of God's ideal. But what though is the force that drives the world towards that oneness? What is this anti-entropy, if you could say? What is this force that is guarantees that the world is being pushed towards that perfection? What is this force? So that is the next paragraph on the bottom right. Ruach HaTeshuva merachef ba'olam, v'hu noten lo et ikar tzivyono u'dechifat hitpatchuto. The spirit, the stream of Teshuva, it hovers in the world, and that is what gives the world its main form and character, and push towards development. In other words, the force behind evolution, the force behind this, with the previous paragraph, that the world is definitely going towards perfection. There's an arrow of time that is going towards positive development, more sophisticated spiritually, physically, morally, every way, every dimension. The main being is the connection of God, of people, human being good, of the goodness of man, the betterment of man. But also the physical goes with that. The physical reality, everything we said, the scientific, technical advances that we have, all that is going towards the betterment of the world, bringing the world to its total. That drives that is the force of Teshuva. In other words, Teshuva is a force in nature. Teshuva is this force that in nature that is pushing the world towards perfection. Towards, in other words, towards the ultimate completion and fulfillment of the divine ideal for creation. So Teshuva is not just this thing that if you do Teshuva, if you sin, you have to do Teshuva. We'll see how that fits into this perspective. But Teshuva is, first of all, getting back in the big picture, let's call it, this universal scene. There is a force that is planted in the world, like a spring. The world, we'll have to explain this later, that is pulled down, this potential energy, and the rest of history is the rising of the returning of the world towards that perfection, towards that absolute goal of goodness. And that's a force. There's a force in nature, in reality, that God planted in the world. There's the goal, and there's a force that pushes the world, this magnetic force, a pull that's pushing the world towards that perfection. Here, the next source. So we see already that we already left the ballpark of the individual of just a religious Jew that has to fix his sins and go back to learning and back to the regular life. Tshuva isn't. It's something. Wow, it's something global, cosmic. It's this cosmic force. Not to be satisfied with the present. A push from within, like a baby grows from its birth. He didn't ask, he didn't decide. The baby, there's an evolutionary force planted in the baby that develops. The baby grows and develops the body and all the developmental stages that we know. The world, like he said before, is not static. It goes through this dynamic historical process of development. And the force that pushes that development, Rav Kook says, is the force of tshuva. Another place, on the top left, Rav Kook writes in chapter 14, at the end of a long paragraph, he says, "Hatshuva." This, what he described above, this is the tshuva, the absolute tshuva. Shetzadikim gmurim ba'im al yada liot olim b'malot balei tshuva. This tshuva that I described above is the tshuva that the righteous, the absolutely righteous, come through or come to be balei tshuva. But how can we say it? Or how can a righteous person, theoretically, it's someone that's tzadik gamur, never sins, how can he be about tshuva? About tshuva is only if he sinned. He has to fix that specific sin. Here he says that tzaddik gamur can be about tshuva. Here it says the righteous.
But Rabbi, I was going to say, in Judaism, the one is responsible for the many. So it doesn't matter if you're tzaddik. You say tshuva on behalf of everybody else.
Well,
so you're always saying it.
Hopefully. Okay, you're right. We'll see that that's part of the direction we're going to head towards, but we're going to see how the extent of that the other people, or what did you say? To help others, to help.
The whole of Klal Israel, we have to do tshuva for everybody. We are
right, what we do, it helps it's not just ourselves, it helps others. So we'll see the great, unbelievable, the extent, like I said, the cosmic extent of that. It's not just the family, the nation. We'll see how big it really is. But you're right. But that's the direction we'll see. But he says, so even, we said it before, that one of the theoretical, hypothetical conclusions that a righteous person can't do tshuva. If he doesn't sin, there's no tshuva. Here it seems to be that the tshuva without sin. In other words, what Rav Kook says above, I think in this paragraph, if I remember correctly, there's tshuva that goes from the negative to zero. In other words, it goes from worse to better. But there's also a tshuva from good to better, from plus to even a super plus, to a higher plus. And that's the tshuva. You don't have to only go from negative to, like, after doing sin. But we're going to see how deep that really is. Like I said, but then we'll try to do it quickly now. We'll try to get to the conclusion. The next paragraph, again, it's from chapter 4. It's just different places throughout tshuva. Al yedei tshuva hakol shav lelokut. Through tshuva, via tshuva, everything returns to godliness. Through the reality of koach tshuva hasorer ba'olamim kulam. That tshuva dwells in all the worlds. Now, there's more to the world than meets our eye, the five senses that we have. There's worlds, right? We say in Ashrei, right? In Ashrei Shevitecha, Tilim Kuf, what we say, 145, Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim. You are your kingdom in all the worlds. We have a small view of the world. What we see with our five senses, a very small, myopic view of reality. But there's much more. There's much more of reality, even in this world. We know there's things we can't pick up with our senses, what they call the electromagnetic spectrum, whatever. There's X-rays and gamma rays, and even in the physical world. But beyond that, there's spiritual worlds and levels of goodness, of holiness, of worlds of dimensions of godliness. And ultimately, though, the force of tshuva that he says is not only in the individual person, right? We wanted to say, is tshuva the first conclusion? It's only after sin, or the second conclusion, it's only in man. Here it says it's in all of the worlds. There's, like we said before, it's this force in reality. It's a law of nature. But what does it mean? It brings the world back to Elokut, back to divinity. So that needs explanation. How the world is seemingly detached or distanced from the divine. And all of the world and all of history, and tshuva is the force that pushes the world, that brings the world back to reconnect, like I called before, right? Plugging in, to plug into the source beyond. How to bring the world to reconnect it to the roots. That is this force of tshuva. But that needs explanation. What does it mean to reconnect? How did we separate? What's going on? So that requires a little bit of an explanation based on the next verse, the next quote. Mahalach kol hayesh hu banoi al yesod tshuva. The process of all of existence is based on the foundation of tshuva. Again, I'm explaining these things very quickly. Each paragraph, each line here needs, there's books written on to explain each thing here. But again, just to the topic I want to get to, of just to the general idea of what is tshuva, what is this force? Because up till now, it's very nice. The world is rising towards God. The world is developing. The world is evolving. The world is getting higher. That's good, but how's that tshuva? Tshuva, we started with the biblical use of it, is return. So the world is getting closer to God, is getting better, is getting more healthy and proper physically and spiritual. That's great. But that's not tshuva, we said. We thought that tshuva was, again, returning to the place or the situation from which you came. So again, the world is rising, is approaching perfection, constantly ad infinitum, rising and getting closer to the source and linking up to the source. That's very good. What's that got to do with tshuva? So here, the secret starts to be revealed. It says the reality is built on tshuva. How? Hahavayot mitgalot betor yerida me'elokiyut la'olamiyut. That all of existences, all that we are aware of and all that we're not aware of, they all are revealed. They come into existence, into being, as a falling from godliness to worldliness. The very act of creation, the very topic of creation, that now there's things that are created, that have borders, that this is here and not there, this is you and not him. Everything has its place, has its definition. That is already limited, that has borders. The divine, there's no borders, there's no limits. It's the absolute beyond, there's no words for it, the absolute oneness of beyond any concepts that we can dream of, but that's the Elokiyut, is there's no borders, the infinite. And how the infinite, there's a fall from the infinite, let's call it, to the finite, to the limited, to the border, in the very act of creation. In other words, creation is not yet the full ideal. For that, I want to elaborate a little bit. On the second sheet.
Rav, I have a question.
Ken, I'm listening.
Sorry.
Who's talking?
Ingrid.
Okay.
Okay. So the fact of we improve ourselves, like we getting better day by day and be better persons, be better, is not like it's connected, but not necessarily you means you are doing teshuva. Like you can improve yourself without do teshuva.
No, every improvement is tshuva, is part of tshuva. What we're going to see, though, hopefully, is how your individual tshuva, your individual improvement is part of something much, much bigger. You're in harmony with all of existence. You're flowing with the tide of reality. You're participating in something so much bigger. Your individual, yes, your individual tshuva, your specific tiny little details become even more important. They're not tiny little details isolated, measured by the specific good thing that you did here, a good deed, or fix something here. This little good deed is part of something much greater, is part of this process of all of reality. So in other words, yes, what you do is definitely part of tshuva, but I'm saying the opposite. In other words, not the opposite, but it becomes even more important. The individual tshuva takes on itself, is infused by the greatness and significance of this universal tshuva that it's part of. Mm-hmm. You're part of this giant machine of goodness, of greatness, of fixing all of reality. Like the Rambam says, you do a mitzvah, the world is like equal, and now you tip the scales. You do a good deed and you tip the scales of all of the world. But we'll see how much deeper it is in that. It's not just a mechanical or a quantitative thing of one more mitzvah and now you tip it. But literally, we'll see how when we'll see exactly, maybe more specifically, how the individual, the human tshuva, like the usual concept of tshuva, of each one of us that sins, God forbid, and does tshuva, how that fits into, there's levels and levels I want to discuss here of tshuva, of these different spheres of tshuva. So I want to get to soon. But definitely it includes the individual improvement, definitely.
It's
It
because
can't go without.
sometimes we think Teshuva is just like, I did something wrong and I realized about it and I will not do this again. But so Teshuva is also like, sometimes we missing many things in our life, like we even didn't realize about that. But every time when you do something better, you are doing Teshuva because you are doing something like better. Like we always have how to improve. So this means like it's always Teshuva. It's not just like I did something wrong and I will not do it again.
Exactly. That's what I want to say. But the question remains, how is that tshuva? I mean, it's nice that I say, yes, that's part of tshuva. But how? If tshuva means returning, then it seems to be that it's only after doing something bad. Otherwise, we can improve, we can rise, we can become better, we can become holier, etc., etc. But how is that tshuva? What I wanted to discuss here is how literally it fits into the category of what you had of tshuva. Because otherwise, it remains in the level of improvement. Like I said, a tzaddik can be more improved and everyone can go higher and higher, but that's not tshuva, we thought. Because we thought tshuva is only after sin. So like you're saying, what you're asking is, yes, that tshuva is more than just repenting from a sin. The question is how? I want to explain the depth of how it fits into the word of tshuva. In other words, it doesn't fit so far. Tshuva, we said, is returning to where you were. If I'm improving, I wasn't there before. I'm better than I was before. So how is that tshuva? I can get better, and you're supposed to, and you have to, and that's very good. You're supposed to constantly live and improving and striving for perfection. But how is that improvement tshuva? So I want to say that the two are the same. Yes, that improvement is also tshuva. And how is what I want to do now and try to, in the few minutes that we're left, to start a little bit of explanation. Maybe I'll skip a few sources to explain quickly how. The first source on the right is the Gemara on Shabbat that asks why on the 6th day of creation it says Yom Hashishi, the 6th day. Up to then it says Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, the first day, second day, and then now on the 6th day of creation it says God created, it was morning and night and morning, night and day. That's the Yom Hashishi, the 6th day. So the rabbis ask, what does it mean, the 6th? Like the article, the specific, the known 6th day. What is that 6th day? So the rabbis say that's referring to God made a condition, so to speak, with creation, that if Israel receives the Torah, accepts the Torah at Sinai on the 6th day of Sivan, then the world will continue to exist. If not, it goes back to nothingness. World cannot exist. So the question is why, what I wrote on the left, why does the world's existence depend on Israel's acceptance of the Torah? If we don't accept the Torah, so punish Israel. It's like a punishment we should get. But why is the world punished? Why the world is destroyed? The world can't exist without our accepting Torah. We have to understand that Torah is not just like I said, an external book of laws that God sent down, do this or don't do that. No, if not for the Torah, there's no point for creation. There's no content. The whole content of the Torah, the whole ideal, all the purpose of the Torah, all the purpose of the world was created just to reach this ideal of the Torah that it represents. Everything is for that, is from that goal, and all of history is leading to that, the fulfillment of that goal. That's the one absolute divine ideal. That's the Torah. It's not a book of laws, so to speak. We also keep the book of laws, but the Torah is the neshama, the divine ideal for all of creation. If we don't accept that, then it's not like it's a punishment. If you don't accept the purpose of creation, if you take the world out, like you take the neshama out of the world, there's no neshama, there's no force of life. If you take the purpose out of creation, the whole being, what it's created for, then there's no world. And that's what it says in the second source, in the Yalkut Shimoni, that it's like it likens it to an architect, a builder, that when he has a building he wants to build, he has what we call blueprints. He has the floor plan. He has the goal of creation in his mind. What he wants to build. He wants to build a palace, And then he has an idea what has to be built accordingly. I need 6 rooms. I need a room to accept the king's guests. I need the kitchen. All the plan is based on the idea. What is the goal? And therefore the plan of exactly how to implement, to fulfill that, how to build the house to fulfill all those needs. But he builds what's called the blueprint. And the last line that's underlined here in that second source, God looked in the Torah and created the world. Now the Torah is the blueprint of the world. The Torah is the neshama, the goal of creation. Is what precedes creation, what all of creation, like I said, it's all from that goal. It's for that goal. All the rooms in the building of reality are to fulfill the goal of Torah that preceded creation. That's the plan before. Let's call it the absolute, transcending divine ideal. But now to get to our topic, the question is, what I wrote here, is the world immediately according to the ideal? Is the world right away? Does it fulfill that goal? Is the world perfect right away? Or is, like we said before, Rav Kook wrote, there's a falling, there's a descending, there's a fall from the ideal, from the infinite to the finite, in the very act of creation. The very fact that there's a gap between, you could say, between the creator and the created, from the finite and the infinite. But that we'll see why and how it takes place, and it's not a mistake.
Rabbi, was that the free will thingy? The fact that Hashem gave us free will, that put the kibosh in? I mean, he didn't want a perfect world that was automatic. He wanted whatever he's got, but it was because of the free will aspect that it became a bit distorted and chaotic, and we've got to rectify it or something. Is that sort of the idea?
Okay, and that's part of it. Yes, definitely. Why? It's not because God was unable to create a perfect world. He created the world like he lowered the spring in order that we should participate. We have free will. There's a lot to talk about why he created the world and why it's not perfect right away. But yes, definitely one of the explanations, what you said, is to enable free will. We'll get to that. That's the bottom of the sheet here. The Ramchal talks about that. But before that, I just wanted to show a few indications of where we see, even in the Torah, that the world was not perfect right away. So the Rashi in the Torah, not the first Rashi, but in the first sentence in the Torah, Bara Elokim, right? The name of Elokim. Like in the beginning of creation, you notice the names of God are exact. When it says Elokim, when it says Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of God, the other names of God, and exactly when it says Hashem Elokim, both of them, you should see each chapter when it changes and what. So here Rashi emphasizes that Bara Elokim is, and doesn't say Bara Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Because in the original idea was to create the world in the measure of justice. And he saw that the world couldn't exist without taking into consideration the weakness of man, of the world, with the finite world, creatures. And therefore he joined it with Midat HaRachamim. And that's why it says later, Vayasat Hashem Elokim. The two things together, Hashem Elokim. Elokim is the name of God, of justice, the law, like the absolute, the strict justice, to be immediately what it's supposed to be. And the Rachamim, the mercy, is not giving up the ideal, but taking into consideration the weakness of the creatures in order to enable them to get to that level, to, like you said, to rectify, and we'll see later, a little bit deeper than that, like you mentioned, the free will, to that man creates himself. Man has the choice, the free will, that there's options in the world, but that's, I don't want to get to that yet, of why the world was created not perfect. But first, the idea is that you see here, the world wasn't the way it was supposed to be, so to speak. It was supposed to be Midat Adin, and it came into Midat through also Midat HaRachamim. The next source, also Rashi in the beginning of Breshit, chapter 1, verse 11, it says in the Torah that it was supposed to be Eitz Pri, tree fruit. Rashi says that it was supposed to be that the taste of the tree was the taste of the fruit. Rav Kook explains this in Quotations, in this very book of Teshuva, what that means, the means and the ends. I don't want to get to that yet, but just to what it's saying here, that it was supposed to be that the taste, that the tree itself had the taste of it, not just the means, the tree, and then later you get to the fruit that has a good taste. The tree itself had already in it that good taste. And he lost Taka, and the earth didn't do so, but rather it says, but Totzea Aretz Eitz Osepri, Velo Eitz Pri. What came out of God said in creation, a fruit tree. And what does it say in creation? That the earth brought out a tree that gives fruits. There's the tree, There's the means that are distinct from the fruit. It gives fruits, but the tree itself is separate from the ideal, from the pre. And not eitz pri, not a tree fruit. That tree is itself. So we see already that there's...
Can I just ask, Tamar said that to us. She said it that was the first sin. It wasn't the sin of Adam, it was the sin of the tree. That the tree wasn't a fruit tree that tasted of fruit, but it gave fruit. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Right, that's called what the sin of the land, right. That's before man.
Okay.
This is before man. This is what's called chet haaretz.
Yeah.
There's a lot, yeah. Here, this is, but I'm saying how the very fact, the beginning of creation, before man came in, we're going to get to these stages of falling. The first stage is the creation is already a falling from the goal. The next source, again, we don't have time yet. The next source in the Gemara and Chagigah, that God created the light. There was a light that, man, you could see from one end of the world to the next. It's this light, this perspective, this vision, this ability to see beyond the limits, unlimited view. Now we have a very, like I said, we see a little type of the spectrum of light physically, and we see only time in the present. We don't see the future. But there was a light. There's this goodness that was put away. The Gemara says here that man would misuse it. So God saw that and put it away for the future. This is the Gemara in Chagigah, page 12a. In other words, there's a certain light, whatever this means, there's a certain goodness, this light, this aura, this perspective, this reality, this connection to godliness, to be so unlimited view that this is not, the world isn't the way that is. In other words, we don't have that today. The world fell, and that's now, it's not like it's gone forever. Not like we're not going to the original sin that we're doomed. The world will return, like we said in the second paragraph. There's nothing like certain in the world like Teshuva, and everything will be returned. Everything will be rectified. Everything will return to that goal, because that's this magnetic pull of Teshuva that is pushing the world back to be what it's supposed to be. What I want to explain is, nevertheless, that the world fell. In other words, in simple words, when the architect has a plan, there's two stages of creation. There's the ideal, the abstract idea in the mind of the builder, and then there's the beginning of the actualization. The actualization is far from the ideal. Like I said, when the carpenter or the architect, they start to build, what you see in front of you is a bunch of nails and hammers and wood and scattered, a cacophony. It's a balagan. Very far from the ideal. You don't see the palace. You don't see this magnificent palace. Then, historically, developmental process of the world becoming more and more towards approaching the fulfillment of that goal. So the world goes from the ideal to the real to return to the ideal. So here we have the word return. Here we're getting to the concept already of returning, of Teshuva. The world returns. The world was in that perfect state. Where? Call it the mind of God, in this infinite goal of the oneness of before creation, the absolute. Call it the mind of the carpenter, of the architect. So the world fell from Elokiyut la'olamiyut, Rav Kook said. The world fell from godliness, from this, it's all perfect in God's being. And it's all there, it's all perfect, it's all complete. But when he created the world, now the world is a world. What is the word? How do you say the word world in Hebrew? Olam.
Yeah.
The rabbis say the word olam is like the word he'elem, the same root of he'elem. He'elem means
Hidden.
Me'elam. The world conceals the godliness, conceals the ideal. Now the very worldliness is already a fallen state from the goal, from the perfect, from the absolute. There's a falling from godliness to worldliness, Rav Kook said, and all of reality is, like I said, this historical developmental process of returning, of Teshuva. It's not just rising improvement. Teshuva is returning to the fulfillment of that ideal, that all the branches of life that seem to be so distant. So like now with light, right? You have a source of light. The farther you get from the light becomes more diminished, decreased. Now you have to have amplifiers on the middle to connect, to make more of the light to continue. In other words, that the goal is that all the branches will be full of the light of God, to return all the branches to the source, to connect them so much that the branches are full of the divine, that the finite becomes infinite, that the mortal becomes immortal. So that's where we're going. You know, there's this process of the spring that goes down from, call it the top, down to what we call reality, and then it goes up. what I wanted to do of, how do I get to the share again? Where's the other sharing? Oh no, where did it go, where did it go? Why did it disappear? Oh, what I wanted to get to, I made a little drawing on the whiteboard of, excuse me, this was just done on the whiteboard of the sharing of Zoom. The world goes from this infinite to creation. What I wanted to get to later, Adam HaRishon was supposed to bring the world from creation, so to speak, from that fallen state, to bring it back to that ideal state of connection to God, of cleavage, of all the branches are an extension of it, are so connected to the source that they become infinite, so to speak, as if close to Hashem. But not only did Adam HaRishon not do so, but he put in another filter. How do I make these things? What is this thing? So not only did he not do so, but he put in another block, another filter, barrier between creation and the world, or excuse me, between God and the creation. Like there's a sun, the divine sun is illuminating goodness, warmth, life, giving to all, greatness and holiness and beauty, and we put in clouds. Adam HaRishon, his first sin, caused this distancing, another falling. Not only did he not bring the world up to its, to connect, to reconnect from worldliness to godliness, but he put another sin. What is a sin? A sin means chisaron in the Torah, in the Melachim also. Chatzitza, Rav Kook said. Every sin is like a barrier, a block between the sun, the source, and the world. So there's more darkness in the world, more suffering, more evil, more distancing of the world from the creation, from the Creator. Then we come along, and we're supposed to bring the world back, to Adam HaRishon, to Gan Eden, and then to go even beyond that, to do tshuva, in other words, to bring the world back to what it was supposed to do. Not only that, do we not do that sometimes, but we do a third barrier, a third dissension, us, right? I put in the bottom here, we come on and add our 2 cents of another distancing. Tshuva, the usual books of tshuva talk about this. How do I do it that I can? So I don't have the thing that. So usually tshuva talks about this third stage of tshuva. How do we fix our sin that we dropped the world from the way it was before we came into the world and bringing it back to where it was before we messed up? So that's the usual thing that we mentioned before, tshuva, you and your individual sins. But even if you don't sin, or even after you fixed your sin, or what Ingrid said, we improve. Our goal is constantly to work to bring the world, all of existence, back from this fallen state that Adam HaRishon, to bring it back to Adam HaRishon where he was. And even then we have work to do to constantly grow and do tshuva, to return the world, all of creation, to what it was supposed to be, to link up to the source. In other words, that's how it's all a giant, there's 3, I can't do the drawing yet, I don't have the thing, but there's 3 spheres of tshuva. Our individual tshuva, that most of the books and the concepts of tshuva, which is true, but they deal with this aspect. You and your private mitzvot and your sins. You sin, go back to what you messed up. But even after that and beyond that, the world is going on a process of tshuva, to return, to elevate, to rise up, but not just to rise, to return. It's literally tshuva. It's returning the world back to what it was supposed to be, back to this original perfect state of, in God's mind, in the divine ideal, let's call it, the Torah, the neshama. And then even after we get to Adam HaRishon, where he was, like I said, to return it always, constantly. This tshuva is this ad infinitum, this process of returning, literally returning the world towards that perfection, never to be satisfied. And that's in our neshama. This isn't some foreign goal that it seems so lofty, whatever. This is, our neshama is called from that dimension of the absolute. Our neshama strives for, aspires for that perfection. Not to be satisfied with, certainly, to get rid of our sins that we did and to correct them, and to repent and to rectify. But even beyond that, never to be satisfied with what exists, what the world is as it is, the evil in the world, the separation of the world from the Creator, that we can't live with. Our neshama, the inner strive, the desire to bring the world towards that absolute perfection, to go from us to Adam HaRishon. That's why even the tzaddikim can do tshuva, even though they never sins, but they still have a lot of work to do to return. Again, why is it tshuva? To return the world to that. I just drew this infinite, but right, there's no pictures. To the absolute goal, to this perfection, to this the state of being of connection to God. So I have to stop now. I'm over the time that Alicia. The next class we'll continue again next week. Bezat Hashem. I don't want to take from her time. It's not fair. So for now, Shabbat Shalom, and all the best.
Thank you, Rav.
Thank you, Rav.